The time is the early 1970s. The place, a lonely tract of moor in southern Scotland. A curlew calls in the clear blue skies, while the wind off the hills shuffles the grass. There's something else though, the sound of a steam locomotive being worked hard. It becomes louder and echoes off the hills, because this was the Waterside colliery line from Dunaskin to Penavini in Ayrshire. Here's a sketch map, not to scale, that I've made of the line. The NCB part, in bold black, goes from Dunaskin to Penavini, almost 7 miles. The gradient varied, sometimes a nominal 1 in 25 in stretches, but subsidence had made that a little worse. Towards the last 10 years, only Minivet and Penavini collieries were working. The rest of the collieries and their branches had closed. Some can be traced on the ground as grass-grown formations in the hills. Some have disappeared without trace because of the later open-cast working. The Ironworks at Dunaskin was once a mighty enterprise, fed by the coal and iron mines in the Doon Valley. The furnace was first blown in 1848, and the village of Waterside was built beside it to house the workers, mainly of Irish and Highland descent. So the Mellington Ironworks Company, DECO for short, was born. The whole enterprise is described in a wonderful book by the legendary David L. Smith. It's as rare as hen's teeth, but you may be able to order it from your local library if you still have one. Back in the 70s, the disused ironworks and the brick kilns were still a presence in the Doon Valley. The BR line to Mellington had closed on the 6th of April 1964, and part of the trackbed was used as sidings for the collieries. You can see the huge ironworks Bing in the background, known as Slag Hill by the locals. I moved to Ayrshire in the early 70s and wasted no time getting to the trackside at Dunaskin. I'll never forget my first magical sight of a Waterside Loco. Andrew Barclay 18-inch tank, number 17, emerging from the early morning mist at Dunaskin washery. There were signs up about guard dog patrols and no trespassing, which did make me a little anxious. But I needn't have worried. Everyone was always very friendly. Along the length of the line, there were endless opportunities to take photos, although usually I just stood there, watching the trains with a stupid happy grin on my face. Luckily, folk like Kevin Lane had the foresight to take a few very fine shots. Once a day, a huge train of empties was taken up to Penavini. The 060s generally worked this train as it was a taxing job. Seeing the long train in the landscape, mainly old wooden internal user wagons with a few BR steel minerals, was incredible. The hills behind the train were like an old book, telling tales of forgotten mines in lumps, dips and old bings. I'd often race in my ancient Land Rover up to Penavini, where I'd watch the empties being shunted under the screens. Then the fulls would be drawn out with much slipping. Once I saw the Loco pull up while shunting, as the driver realised the road wasn't set for him. He whistled the shunter to remind him, and much good-humoured banter followed. The engineer's shop, in the background here, was always a good place to see interesting stuff, like narrow-gauge locos and tubs. There was also a very antiquated crane kept at Penavini. I saw it a couple of times on the permanent way train. Keith Taylorson captured it here, with Tam Bruce in charge of number 1. Minivet was another interesting spot. When I first visited the place, the drift mine was still in operation. It was only opened in 1956, replacing the colliery at Charmerston, which closed in 1959. You can see the Bings from Chalmerston in the background of some of the photos. 2 drifts at Menivee went down to 700 feet, and there was an underground narrow gauge system, 3'6", I think. After closure, the mine site was used as a tip, and for a while was the base for what we now know as the Doon Valley Railway, before they had to relocate to Dunaskin. Another favourite spot was the Late Bing. The gradient here was brutal. It took some nerve to drive a loco at full regulator up the sketchy track, pushing a cut of 10 rubbish wagons. But it was all done with great nonchalance, as if this was nothing out of the ordinary. When the top was reached, the loco would hold the Hudson side tipper wagons and belch out a black cloud of smoke, as if relieved it had made it yet again. Spoil would then be graded and levelled by a Caterpillar dozer. One of the things that intrigued me about the line was that each loco had a tender, a wooden internal user wagon, with the end door taken away. Some of the 040s had minimal bunker space anyway, and would be cold on the move from the tender. Usually the floor in the cabs of the smaller locos was stacked with coal. The big locos needed a top-up along the way up to Penavini. Here's a view towards the Cutler sidings and Dunaskin, with the washery in the distance. I love the fireman's shovel propped up on the tender, although I'm surprised it stayed like that given the uneven track. Another favourite spot to catch the locos was the Dunaskin bothy and water tank. The locos would be parked outside while the men had a mug of tea and a sandwich. There was a large array of sidings here. Trains would be marshalled for BR locos to take on to Falkland Yard, then the docks at Ayr. The coal went to Northern Ireland in a small fleet of ships, captured here by David Christie. In the 50s and 60s, trains would be handled by Ayr's roster of Hughes Fowler moguls, or crabs as they're better known. In later days it would be Class 25s and 20s, double-headed. In the 70s we called all diesels froth boxes, although I appreciate them more nowadays. On one of my visits, I was shocked to see a train full of enthusiasts instead of coal. It was comical. The wagons were crammed with greisers. I felt a little miffed, thinking that, well, this was my line, until I realised how much everyone was enjoying the trip. Well, I could share it, couldn't I? After all, I only lived a few miles away, and I could see it any time I liked. I never saw real loco abuse here, unlike at Polkemmet, where locos would be thrashed with incandescent smoke boxes. I know that Tam Bruce, number 24's regular driver, wouldn't consider giving his engine rough treatment, probably why the locos lasted so well. Tam's father had driven a loco here, and many of the men had similar family connections. It was very much the same story at Penavini Colliery too. There's a great photo of Tam Bruce in Bill Roberton's wonderful book, Scottish Colliery Pugs in the 70s. Tam was a quiet but friendly man who played in the local brass band. Some copies of Bill's photos are to be seen on the table. There were quite a few locos used by the Ironworks and collieries at Waterside over the years, but here I'm focusing on the ones I saw in the 70s. In this film, we can see number 17, showing how it was done. The men called her the Big Yen, and she worked on the Waterside line for an amazing 65 years. Quite a record. She was built in 1913, but she'd had a mishap early in her career, when she left the rails and killed a workman. Well, there was no obvious reason for the derailment, but her middle drivers had the flanges removed subsequently. She never came off the track again, so it must have worked. Sad to say, number 17 has had mixed fortunes since being sold into preservation. She'd gone for overhaul at Cowdenbeath Central Workshops, but was considered uneconomic to repair, so she was dumped. Several bits were removed and lost. Then she languished for some years at the Tanfield Railway, before going to Wales to the Gwylly Railway, then to the Llangollen Railway, where quite a bit of work was done. She's now at the Flour Mill Works at Bream in the Forest of Dean. Hopefully they've managed to find all the bits. Number 17 was, for me anyway, an elusive beast. Apart from that first time, I rarely saw her working, although I did get to inspect her a few times in the shed. Here she is in happier times, with the Craigmark Moor behind her, and the inevitable extra crew member. Of all the locos that were at Waterside in my time, number 24 was my favourite. She was built in 1953 to pretty much the same design as number 17, except with sloping bunkers to help with sight lines. She cost £10,000 from Andrew Barclay's, but she wasn't a popular loco at first, I was told. She was shy of steam and had to stop for frequent blow-ups. But in 1965, the NCB had started to fit Geissel ejectors to many of their locos. Some engineers came from Barclays and fitted one to number 24. It did little for her looks, but transformed her performance. Now she was a popular loco. Handsome is as handsome does. I know Geissel ejectors don't seem to have achieved great results elsewhere, but I heard about the change in number 24 from the men themselves. And anyway, excessive coal consumption isn't much of a problem in a colliery. An interesting thing about the Waterside locos was that some were fitted with plates to allow them to travel on BR metals, as in this shot of number 24. Another interesting thing, 24's middle drivers were flangeless too, like number 17. Sensible. When the place closed, number 24 was purchased by Museums of Scotland and loaned to the Boden and Kinneil Railway, where she hauled their first official train. She's out of ticket now, but safely in covered storage at Boden. Number 1 arrived in 1977 from Cairnhill. She was a powerful-looking 040 and seemed modern compared to the other 040s. She was built in 1955 and was usually to be seen shunting at Cutler sidings. I had heard that she was a bit lacking in guts. Another candidate for a Geissel ejector, perhaps. She stood outside at Dunaskin just now, awaiting her turn in the queue for restoration. Number 10 was built in 1947 by Andrew Barclay and was considered a really useful engine. I saw her a few times, being banked by number 21 on the empties. She spent her entire life at Waterside, so it's appropriate that she's currently the flagship loco at Dunaskin and in good form, running trains on the Doon Valley Railway most Sundays. Number 21 was built in 1949 and was a stalwart performer. She sloped quietly off to Cairnhill in summer 1975, which seemed a bit strange. She's now cosmetically restored by the Boden and Kinneil Railway at the National Mining Museum at Newton Grange in East Lothian. I always knew that I was seeing the swan song of steam at Waterside, of course. But the moment I had been dreading came all too soon. On the 6th of July 1978, the Waterside system closed. Number 24 worked the last train, a whistle echoing plaintively across the valley. Tam Bruce transferred to Killock, where he drove a diesel. The closure of Penavini Colliery was a major blow to the community. But it wasn't quite the end. Open cast coal started to be washed at Dunaskin, brought by road from various sites such as the mine on the slopes of Benbeach. A handsome Sentinel diesel was brought in to shunt the hoppers, which were then taken on to Ayr, almost like old times. But that ended in 1986. Then, a couple of years later, An open cast working was started over the old Chamerston mine. Advances in technology, they said, meant that they could get to the coal measures from the surface, basically by digging a whopping great hole. The old Waterside formation was upgraded and relaid to take 33-ton HAA hoppers. Coal was dragged away in vast quantities, sometimes behind double-headed Class 37s, latterly by Class 60s and 66s, as these great photos by Gordon Thompson show. The coal was disposed of at Ayr docks, as it always had been, but with upgraded handling facilities. Production ceased in 2010. Scottish Coal had gone bust, and it was discovered that there had been no mitigation provisions to restore the land. East Ayrshire Council eventually took on the task. For a while, after coal production had finished, vast rakes of HTA coal hoppers were parked at Ayr docks, rusting in the salty breeze as they waited for disposal. And so to the present. What remains of the Waterside line is in the hands of the Doon Valley Railway, a determined group of fine folk who have survived despite many setbacks, such as their landlord deciding at short notice to sell off the land they were renting. They have a fascinating collection of vehicles and artefacts at their Dunaskin base. Number 10 is operational at the moment, and an Andrew Barclay fireless Loco, the only one in Britain in working order. Most weekends in the summer months, a plume of steam can be seen at the old Loco shed, and trains run up and down their length of running line. The place is well worth a visit. The folk at Dunaskin desperately need volunteers to help run the trains and man the shop and cafe. I hate to think of this wonderful place having to close due to lack of support. So if you can, please pay a visit or consider donating a £5. It would be so much appreciated. And if you decide to take a walk up into the hills above Waterside, listen carefully. You'd be lucky these days to hear a curlew or a lapwing, but you might just catch the ghostly bark of a colliery pug carried on the wind across the lonely moor. Thank you so much for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe if you did. And huge thanks go to all the photographers who've generously provided their work to illustrate this film. It wouldn't be much without you guys. I'll see you again soon with the next video.